This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 535 for November 19th of 2020. Magna, supplier extraordinaire. Watch Autoline After Hours live at autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Hyundai, Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Gary,
John,
we're back at it. All right, man. Let's do a show.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
You too?
Good. Can't complain. So this day in 1956, a new brand was established. And I bet you can guess what it is.
I'll bet I can too. Should I guess?
We'll put this in so that people can think about this. And exactly 3 years later, so November 19th, 1959, said brand ceased to exist. And the answer is?
Edsel.
You got it right. You know, one of the funny stories about Edsel is that when they were developing the marketing, that they talked to this American poet, Marianne Moore, and said, you know, come up with some names that we might be able to use for this. And among the names were Utopian Turtle Top, Pastelogram, Turcotinga, and Resilient Bullet.
Yeah,
So
and they ignored all those names and they went out of business in 3 years.
See? You think there was something there?
That's right. That's great. Hey, we should let everybody know we've got Mike Colias with us today from the Wall Street Journal. Where is he? There he is. Hey, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Everything good in the Wall Street Journal world?
Yeah, we're plugging along, man. The news cycle's been out of control, so it's been keeping us busy, even working from home like everybody else.
Yeah, boy, the news cycle has been crazy. Even yet this afternoon, and we'll get into some of that, I hope, later in the show.
Yep.
GM had some big announcements today.
Right.
But
yeah,
hey,
I mean, they're spending more money on electric vehicles. It's like the story that keeps on giving, right? But
that's right. That's right. But let's bring in our special guest for the day, Don Walker, the CEO of Magna International. Don, hello.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on here. I don't know why you call this Autoline After Hours at 3 p.m. when we don't think of after hours till about 10 p.m. at night.
No, you're right. You know, when we first started doing the show, I believe we started at, I think it was 8 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And then my crew was like, boy, these nights these are long days for us. So we decided to move it to 7 o'clock. No, then we moved it to 6 o'clock. And then all the guests who would come out to the studio were like, man, you're killing us. The traffic is just so bad at this time. So we bit the bullet and we moved it to 3 p.m. Eastern time, but we kept the name. So you're right, but there's the story behind it.
It's after hours somewhere, Don.
Yeah.
Hey, Don, this is a victory lap for you. I have announced your retirement. You've already announced your successor, Swami Kotagiri, who's going to succeed you as CEO of Magna. But we ought to talk a little bit about your career here because, man, when I first learned about Magna, I think you guys were making like door hinges or something like that. And now you've grown to this amazing powerhouse, third largest automotive supplier in the world. And you do everything from soup to nuts. It's must have been a hell of a ride for you to help build the company to where it is today.
Well, it has been, it's hard to believe. I've been a Magna for 33 years. I was at General Motors 7 years before that. But when I joined, very interesting company, mainly run by tool and die makers from Europe, actually. And they were running a lot of interesting plants, and there was like odds and ends around the car. Very unique culture. Unfortunately, went into bankruptcy protection for a couple of years in 89, 90. That's when I took over operations. So it has been a very interesting career. And the founder, Frank Stronach, was a very interesting entrepreneurial thinker. So that was a big part of it in the early years as well.
So what did you do at General Motors?
I graduated University of Waterloo, and I did I was there for 7.5 years at 8 jobs. So everything from plant engineer to first line supervisor, general supervisor, superintendent, senior engineer of a body shop, superintendent, overseeing all the technical aspects of a new launch of the General Motors. I guess it was back in the GMT 400 in those days, a long time ago. But yeah, I did a lot. I had a great opportunity to learn because it was mainly in Oshawa, and they were going through a huge expansion then. So that's the time you want to learn.
You sure you're ready to walk away now, Don? Everything's just getting interesting, right?
Well, you know, I've been asked a lot, like, why now? My health is extremely good. I really focus on advanced health. It's one of my pet projects. I'm going to continue to do that. But, you know, I think there's so many changes in the world. Like, Magna is very global. We operate all around the world. We're in a big part of the parts and the systems in the vehicle. And we also design and engineer complete vehicles. So if you look at what's going on now with new mobility and new business models and who's going to own the data, new entrants, how are they going to enter electrification of the powertrain, autonomous driving. There's so much going on. It is a fascinating area. We just had our tech committee review with a number of, with Swami, the incoming CEO, and a number of other industry experts. It's just fascinating what's going on. But, you know, you get to figure out, I don't really think what's the right time for me. I'm going to continue to do a number of things. But what's the right time for a company? And there is so much going on now. You really need to have somebody who's thinking 10, 15 years down the road and who truly understands the technology when you're playing in the areas that we are in. And not that I say I don't understand it, but I think it was the right time to move to somebody who has had a lot of experience inside Magna, but really lives and breathes this. So to the extent Swami wants my input and help, I'm going to continue to provide that because I have a real interest in what's going to happen with Magna. But I think it was the right time. We've got a lot of new management in their key positions in our company that all have about 10 years of runway left. So looking as a CEO as to what's the structure, what's the culture, what's the management team, and do you have the right people to really think through these complex issues going forward? And I think we have it. I have no doubt we have it. So I think you're going to see Magna continue on its pretty impressive, in my opinion, growth rate and really being a technical leader in a lot of different areas.
Yeah. Don, let's talk a little bit 10, 15 years down the road, maybe not just for Magna, but for the entire supplier industry. Where do you think this is going? And I ask in the sense what the issue that Gary just brought up. I mean, you can do anything right now, right? I mean, when it comes to electric vehicles, it's very much in its infancy. When you talk about autonomous vehicles, when you talk about digital services, data monetization and all that, what's your vision for the supplier of the future?
Well, and I think part of it is, I won't go into a big tangent, but I've been studying where I think the world is going. And I've got a project I'm working on more for Canada and specifically for Ontario and Canada, future prosperity. And I kind of look at, and I think it's applicable to the US as well, or any country, you'd say, where is the country now? Like, what are the fundamentals of the country? And where do they want to be in 20 years down the road? And interesting, what's going to be happening with the world 20 years down the road? So we know there's some unstoppable trends that are going to continue. Some of them are, you know, the wealth distribution gap between individuals and countries, quite frankly, and the additive manufacturing or 3D printing, advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. There's a lot of things going on in the world. Education is going to change. I think healthcare should change as well. So you'd say if that's the context of what's going on in the world, and then you look back at the mobility and transportation industry, which is now moving people as well as goods, and I think that trend is going to continue. Well, what do you need for that? Is it, can people be on 2 wheels, 3 wheels, 4 wheels? How it's going to move around? I think you look at flying vehicles, I think that's quite a ways off in the future. But when you look at everything, you'd say, what are you trying to accomplish? And then you drop down to say, from a mobility standpoint, what is going to be providing that service? And a lot of people aren't looking at a car anymore. They're looking at something will get them to point A to point B, which is really an extension of themselves or their communication. So we've been looking at all this quite deeply in the last couple of years. And then you look at new materials, and there's going to be whether it's solid state batteries or carbon nanotubes. There's so much going on. So I think you're going to see some of the major trends continue the way they have. The electrification is certainly speeding up. Autonomous driving, there was way too much hype in the early years. And I still think the volumes are quite low. When you get to level 4, level 5, it's much more difficult than people had outside the industry really understood. But level 2.5 to 3 is certainly coming. I think one of the big trends in the industry, and we'll see what happens with the new administration in the States, but around the world, is sustainability is a real issue. I think it's a real issue. And we've been looking at what we're doing internally, because we can do it from the product standpoint, we can do it from the manufacturing standpoint. But I hope that people will looking at scientific facts and say, what are the best solutions? And is it, you really need to be looking at what is the cradle to grave energy equation of anything we're promoting, whether it's batteries, whether it's hydrogen, how much solar power do you have? Can you generate the hydrogen through green energy? Where in the world are we producing green energy? And if we're not producing green energy, is a good solution electric vehicles there or not? So I think this could go on for hours or days, but I do think that the mobility industry, it's the highest tech industry in the world. It'll continue to be that way. I think it's going to be a big industry. It may morph. There may be some new players coming in. The barriers to entry are lower, but there's lots of changes going on. But long term, I think you can get a pretty good idea of where things are going to be. So then you got to sort of say, like, skate to where the puck is going to go. And that's what we've been focused on, is where do we really want to spend the money, with a balance between getting good returns in the short to medium term and being really healthy for the long term.
Don, you mentioned both structure and culture. And to your point of the where you see the industry going as it moves forward, are traditional players likely to be as dominant in the auto industry 10, 15 years from now as they presently are? Or will we see companies that we're perhaps not familiar with or just read something about, or something that Mike has written about?
I think you're going to see some new players enter. People say, well, look at Tesla, look how well they're doing. They're a new entrant. Well, they're not a new entrant. They've been around for 20 years and they've done a lot of things. They've got a couple of good home runs there. So I think we will see some new players coming in. I don't think they're going to come in necessarily the same way as their traditional car maker would. They're probably going to more cater to what end consumer wants and what's the brand and what services they're offering, and not worry so much about who's going to do the engineering, the manufacturing, and all the traditional things. And there's probably lower barriers to entry when you can get platforms and electric platforms for new vehicles. To the extent we look at it quite a bit, because as you said, we're the third biggest supplier. We could be anywhere from the second to the fourth. There's a few in that area, but it's really important to us to understand where's volumes going and who's going to make those volumes, because we don't want to compete with our customers, even though we can make contract vehicles. And I think those that will be successful in the long term are those that will manage their cost and their overhead effectively, because they're going to be competing with people that don't have all the legacy costs, don't have all the overhead, that aren't so vertically integrated. And those that can attract the talent to come up with innovative new forms of mobility and attract the software, either people internally or partner. There's a lot of different business models. And we've been looking at investing in startup companies, even groups of people, giving them equity so that they can grow a business and then they work with us. So I think there's a lot of new business models that are going to be different from the old business models.
Don, I'd love to get your take on, it's a related question on sort of the dynamics between the OEM and the supplier going forward. I mean, we've seen a lot of a trend toward insourcing on the battery electric vehicle side, where you've got OEMs now making not just battery cells, but electric motors, inverters, e-axles, that kind of thing. And then you've got companies like GM that are licensing their platform to Honda and other startups potentially. I mean, are we seeing a blurring of the lines between OEM and supplier? I mean, could a GM or someone like it emerge as a giant supplier in the next decade or two?
When I look at who the competitors are to ourselves as a supplier, I don't see the OEMs as doing that. It's not their. I mean, could they have a good technology? Could they license it? yes, is their cost base typically as competitive as the supply base? It definitely isn't. And one of the reasons is if you think about if you look at how competitive the supply be, or we don't get the next contract, I mean, a supplier. So I think.
Don, hold on. Say that again. You just broke up for us.
Oh, sorry. I don't see the OEMs being effective suppliers. They may have good technologies, and we've done partnerships with them as well, but they really need to focus on making the product they want in a competitive way and having the right, attracting the right people. I think everybody they have to do what they believe is the right thing, because they have a lot of good employees and they want to look after employees. But if they're too vertically integrated, or they have defined benefit pension plans, they have all these benefits, they're not going to be able to succeed. They're just, they're just not going to be able to, in my opinion, unless you have products that have these huge margins. So I think the trend towards globalization will continue, but it won't be like the be all and end all. I think the trend towards continuing to go outside for suppliers to have the best product at the best price will continue. They will insource some things, especially if they're trying to utilize the employees they have there, because I think they do care about their employees, but they may be running the attrition curve down. I can't comment on it. They're all going to have their own strategy. But if they don't go to where they get the best product at the lowest price with the best quality, they will not sustain their profit margins, and they won't sustain themselves long term. And it's a difficult question for everybody to wrestle with. But as a supplier, I think we're going to continue to have more opportunity. The big suppliers will get bigger. We'll have to have strong balance sheets. We'll have to be doing deep R&D, be software companies as well as hardware. So I think there will be a lot of changes coming up, but they don't happen overnight.
Hey, we've got to take a very quick break right now, commercial break. We're going to come back talking with Don Walker at Magna. All right, we're back. And Don, I'd love to ask you a little bit about Fisker, because they're taking a very interesting approach to the second generation of bringing the company back, I guess you could say, in that looks like they're going to outsource just about everything. Henrik Fisker will design the vehicle inside and out. They'll control the brand and all that sort of thing. But it looks to me like you guys are going to build the entire vehicle for them. Can you give us any more details of where you are with that program?
Well, we don't normally talk about anything unless our customers will talk about it first, but they have released the information, so I can at least talk about that. I think if you look at you said they can outsource pretty well everything. It's not easy, but product engineering, project management, managing the supply base, and doing the assembly is very complicated. But does the end consumer really care about that? I mean, all they really want to do is say, get me the product at the lowest price and the best quality. And I think we can do that. I think that's the reason why Fisker has turned to us to help them work with them in this project. But as a new company, if they can style the vehicle, if they can do the consumer interface, if they can look at how do they interact with that consumer and provide services to them and look at the data side of it, that's kind of new and very intriguing. So they have got a lot on their plate, and they, like any new entrants would. And if they get it right, there's probably some big opportunity there. Do they then have to say, I want to build up from scratch all of this expertise that we have already got, including assembly, like just managing a supply base and bringing everything together to assemble a car? It's a mammoth task. So they're keeping what they feel is critical. We're doing things that are very technically demanding, but we can do it for them. And there's going to be some middle ground there that I think we're both going to be helping each other and learning from.
To tee off on that, there are some new entrants that are building entire factories to build EVs. Do you think that's a wise idea, or do you think that they should perhaps look at the supply base as a way to at least get their foot in the door before they go full out with these factories?
Well, I'm not going to criticize anybody for what they're doing, and I'd have a biased opinion because we can provide that for them. But I would think if it's a big enough job, as I just said, to get the brand and the design of a vehicle and get all the attributes right and figure out how to distribute it and all that side of it, and the innovative ways to do financing. The software is a big part of that as well, and how the vehicle will work. So for somebody to take all that on as a startup company and then say we're also going to try and be a complete car company, I wouldn't do it. But and if you look at people say, well, the car companies are slow, they're this or this. Designing and making and putting together a vehicle and doing all the project management is an extremely difficult task that people outside the industry have no concept of that until they get into it. And we've seen it over and over again because we have Magna. So I think they have to figure out what is their core competency and what's the best way to get to market. And you can always get into that later, but if getting the volume right and having all the capital there and having a paint shop, and it's not an easy task.
Don, I'd love to get your take on what we've seen for the valuations of some of these electric vehicle startups. We've seen Nikola surpass Ford for a while in market share without really any revenue, and there's a Chinese company, NIO, that is now more valuable than General Motors. I mean, what do you think investors are looking for, and why do they seem to be discounting the kind of assets that big tier one suppliers and legacy OEMs have inside their operations?
Well, you might have a better answer to that than I do, because you look at talk to people who do the valuations. I think a lot of people are probably looking at what the valuation of Tesla is, and it just continues to go up, and it's been an amazing story. So somebody can do that even in a small way. Then I presume people are thinking, well, the valuation should be there. As I said earlier, I do think the traditional industry, and this would include the suppliers like Magna, we trade at very low margins, partly because people believe the industry is cyclical, and it is to a certain extent, but we can generate some very good cash. So if the investors are believing that the traditional players are going to lose huge market share, or they can't keep that cash flow up, or the restructuring costs or their overhead is too high, then maybe that's why they trade where they do. I don't think the automotive industry has been particularly good stewards of capital. I think they do too much on their own. I don't think there's enough cooperation and test procedures and all sorts of things. You see a lot better cooperation in the industry now, which I think is an intelligent thing between car companies, between suppliers. So I don't play the stock market. Would I be investing in a brand new player unless they've got a really solid plan and with some really solid partners with them, like Fisker's doing with us? And then it can be a pretty challenging time getting to market. But there's going to be some people that come up with a really novel something or other, and I'm sure they're going to gain some market share. Beyond that, it's hard for me to comment on why companies have certain stock prices.
Don, talk a little bit more about what you're going to be doing once you step away from Magna. You talked a little bit earlier on of working especially with the government of Ontario. As you well know, far better than anybody else, the auto industry has been shrinking in Canada, yet it's an excellent source of technology and quality and all the like. Is that what you're going to be trying to work on, is get that back up on its feet?
Not necessarily. I think it could be a byproduct, and it's nice to see that Ford, General Motors, and FCA have all put some product mandates back into Canada. I think Canada is quite a competitive area, and I think getting over the USMCA or the new NAFTA, I think it helps things to settle things down. I think there's a lot of things that probably help with the idea on future prosperity. Quite frankly, is for the West, and I would think of the West as being Canada and the U.S. The U.S. would be hard to tackle. but just doing things, doing things more efficiently, getting government to focus on what they should focus on, getting world-class education for young people, looking at technology development. There's all sorts of areas that if we get that right, then you become a more productive and competitive society. The prosperity goes up, and then I think a lot of things can happen. If you don't get that right, it's sort of a slow decline, and I'm quite worried about that in the West. I see some things that are going well, some other things that aren't. So that's really what I'm working on. I'm not working on it specifically to try and rebuild the auto industry. If we get it right in Canada, the future prosperity for future generations benefits. So I'm quite passionate on that.
Don, your alma mater, the University of Waterloo, is becoming a real center for automated technology for vehicles and other applications. Is this becoming a sort of a Silicon Valley up in Ontario?
There's a lot of talent. Waterloo certainly would be one of the leaders, University of Toronto. There's a lot of artificial intelligence expertise in Canada as well. In fact, some of the early pioneers, we call them the three godfathers of AI, were a couple of decades ago in Canada. So on the engineering side and the software side and the artificial intelligence side, there's a lot of expertise up in I'd say into other pockets as well, with the Waterloo to Toronto corridor. And I think that's something that a lot of companies are taking advantage of. And quite frankly, one of the things we try and do is make Magna understood so that we can attract some of the best and brightest, especially when it comes to software development. And once they see what we're doing inside, I think they get interested in that. But the automotive industry isn't necessarily the first industry that those people will look at.
Hey, Don, with all the excitement going on around growth opportunities in the industry right now, connected car to electric, autonomous, what would you say to a tier 3 supplier who's like completely exposed to internal combustion, diesel engines, making whatever exhaust manifolds or something? What obviously there's going to be ICE for a long time to come, but if they're looking for where they grow, where do you turn if you're a supplier like that?
Yeah, I don't think as you said, the internal combustion engine doesn't disappear overnight. And I do think it's going to, depending on a number of the levers, will depend on how fast EVs, electric vehicle or electric drivetrains will take over. But it's certainly well into the 2030s. So I wouldn't panic. But I think you also need to be, if you're putting new investment into designing a new product or capital investment, you have to look at what's the life, how much you're amortizing that over. And there's going to be different solutions. Now, a lot of them will be software driven. We have electronic latches, as an example. We have a system where we take the cameras and the mirrors, we put them all together, and we can come up with a solution. So there's a ton of software in the products that have nothing to do with the drivetrain in the vehicle. So you have to be always thinking about what is the cost equation, we call it value analysis, value engineering of our products. So people are looking at other solutions. If you've got technical capability, doesn't mean you have to stick with what you've got. And you can always be looking around and partnering. And we're working with a lot of startup companies, universities, and there's a lot of interesting ideas out there, but they don't know how to get to the automotive industry because the car companies will never pick these small players. So I don't know if that helps a tier 3. It certainly helps us in identifying where there's some new promising products to bring to market.
Don, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap this segment up. Really want to thank you for making the time available for us today. And, congratulations on an incredible career. Congratulations on building Magna into the powerhouse that it is today. And you have a well-deserved, I'm not going to call it a retirement because you're not calling it that either, but we'll just say you deserve whatever else you're going into now.
Well, I appreciate it. And we've talked a number of times over the years, and, I'm getting a lot of people that give me, accolades, but it really always comes down to a team. And I personally believe you're going to see Magna continue to be a dominant player going forward. We have such a strong management team and the depth in the company. Until you get in and see it, it's hard to imagine. So I'm really confident in our future, but I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to getting up without reading 50 emails and having a full schedule.
Best of luck.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck, Don.
Thanks, Don. And we're going to take another quick commercial break right now. Give a shout out to our good friends at Hyundai.
Where is the car key? I don't understand. Which hole has the car key in it?
Come on, I don't want to be late to this.
You're killing me, man.
The all-new Elantra with Hyundai Digital Key.
Oh man, we're back already.
You know, the thing that occurs to me is that, okay, although we know all about Magna, and although I know many of our viewers are familiar with Magna, I'm sure that there are lots that don't realize the just breadth of that company. I mean, from bodies to chassis to transmissions to all-wheel drive systems to control modules to seats to building the Jaguar I-Pace, the Toyota Supra, BMW 5 Series. I mean, it's just incredible that this he said it started with these tool and die makers who came to Canada from Europe. I mean, it's phenomenal.
It's a great story. Don mentioned Frank Stronach, who literally, I think, showed up in Canada with like $25 in his pocket or something like that, and started looking around at what things he could do and built the company from there. And as Don mentioned, they got in deep trouble and damn near went bankrupt, and were able to pull it together. And to your point, Gary, they have very strategically moved into different areas of business. And it's been really remarkable to watch the growth of the company. And I believe he's right. I think it's going to continue to grow. And in fact, as I've said on the show, I'm far more bullish on the supplier side of the business than I am on the OEM side, because it doesn't matter what new companies come in or what have you, suppliers are going to sell to everybody.
Those are the guys who drive the innovation to begin with, right? And we a lot of times they're restricted from talking about what GM or Ford just wants everyone to think that, hey, we made this, right? But the suppliers can't really kind of get into their contribution. But no, I totally agree with you. Magna it's amazing. I mean, they're doing things with camera monitoring systems. I mean, stuff you just never really associated Magna with before. They're finding all those little growth niches, just like a lot of the big tier ones are.
And one thing I really like that Don said is the mobility industry is a high-tech industry. And I think the three of us would agree that the growth for mobility could be stupendous. If we just talk traditional car, look, the Western world is saturated. There's no growth in units. There might be growth in revenue as you add features that customers want, but the total isn't going to grow. There's still the developing world, China's still there, but that's going to mature out. But mobility, man, the growth potential there is enormous.
Yeah.
Another interesting. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I just was going to say it gets back to that question I asked him about valuations, and I think that's the trouble is, Wall Street wants to look at car companies the way they always have as cyclical businesses. They're not growth plays. And there's a ton of growth out there. And I think what the market's telling us now is that they're not betting on the traditional car companies to go find it and execute it and capitalize on it. It's all these other smaller companies. And, maybe that's because if you want to bet on a Ford, you've got to bet on everything else that goes along with that, which is pension obligations and unionized workforces. But I think you're right. I think that this question around, this view of the auto industry as as a cyclical, not a growth industry is transforming, but no one really knows, who the winners and losers are going to be. And right now they're reticent to bet on the big legacy guys.
One of the things that I find interesting about Magna is that although they have the high tech, they have, developed EV capabilities and autonomous capabilities. John, as you'll remember, when we had the Acura MDX in the studio, one of the big things was the hot stamp door ring that was being made by Magna. So here you have this company that is, stamping metal as well as crafting silicon. I mean, it's just really amazing that how do you make the decisions that this is what you're going to target? These are the areas you're going to go into. These are the areas you're going to leave. I mean, that's what I think was really masterful about the company under Don's tenure.
Yeah. So speaking of valuations and new technology and growth, I'm sure you guys both saw the announcement today. General Motors made. Mary Barra was talking at, I think it was the Barclays conference. Is that right?
Yes.
They're claiming that we're getting more details. You know, they've been talking about their EV efforts a lot, but now we're getting more stuff. For example, saying they're going to cut the cost of their batteries by 60%. They're going to come out with 30 vehicles within 5 years. They're pulling programs forward quickly. Mike, what do you think? The last I looked at GM stock this afternoon, didn't seem to move the needle much.
Well,
and yet everybody's doing handsprings over the news.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, their stock, to be fair, has come up a bit. And it was really hammered back in March, you know, back down into the teens, and now it's above $40 at least. But I mean, if you look at a stock chart, Tesla or NIO or one of these startups compared to GM and Ford, it's really striking to see just how lackluster the performance has been. I mean, I think so. I asked Doug Parks, their product chief, you know, why accelerate this stuff? I mean, they were already making one of the biggest bets in the industry. Like, what is, you know, now we've got this sort of pandemic uncertainty. We don't necessarily have, I mean, the underlying demand for EVs, I think, is still a bit of a question mark, right? GM does not, unlike other companies, have the regulatory sort of feet to the fire because they're not in Europe, and that's kind of the near-term threat in terms of, you know, actually be facing fines if you don't have your emissions under control. So I asked him, you know, why the urgency, and he just said, "This is a space we want to lead. Tesla has done a great job, and we feel like if we don't fend off these newcomers," and he was very blunt about it, that, you know, we're going to get left behind if we kind of do this in half measures. And so, you know, we've all seen GM over the years kind of pick spots and then pull back. I think the more I see that this is a real thing. This is Mary Barra's play. This is her legacy. And there's just a lot of questions around how quickly it happens and how deep they should be going right now.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that this week the UK came out and said 2030, that's the end of new internal combustion engine sales in the UK. Quebec came out and said 2035. We've got Sweden 2030, state of California 2035. But the thing I get back to is I think about, you know, the situation, say, in the UK and in other parts of Europe, as you mentioned, Mike. And, you know, we saw General Motors leave those markets. I wonder if there's a little bit of regret that they're not there anymore, because there would be an opportunity for them to be able to deploy some of these vehicles that they're going to be making.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I know that's, you know, you don't just jump back into those markets. And so maybe that becomes an opportunity for their Ultium battery technology play, where they can maybe license technology to some of the players over in Europe. Maybe that's one way that they can participate in that. But to your point, you know, we spend so much time looking at, okay, well, what's China doing? You know, what's the European Union doing? What's the White House going to do on emissions? And then out of nowhere, California can say, well, you can't sell gas cars here by, you know, a certain date, 2035. So like these little sort of unilateral one-offs by different, even cities down to the city level, cities, states, and countries saying, you know, you're not going to be able to sell here anymore. I think that we can't discount that as a factor for why GM and others are moving, even in the last few months, much faster than they were before.
Well, don't you think it comes back to the valuation discussion too? I mean, GM is trying to reposition itself not as a traditional automaker, but as an advanced mobility company, because it wants greater valuations.
No, there's no question. I think that's reason one. I think the regulatory is probably second to that. You know, they have seen, and you can see it. I mean, when they come out with a big announcement, oftentimes, not so much today, but if an analyst writes a glowing note about their, you know, electric vehicle platform, it can bump the stock by a couple percent. They don't get near the moves that Tesla does when it, you know, coughs the wrong way or whatever. But it's a clear line. I mean, the street wants to know that they're serious about electric vehicles. But the problem is, I think that what they really want is for GM to spin off the business. And I just don't think that's, you know, if you're on record as saying you think the future is all electric, and then you spin your electric business off, what's left for GM, right? So I just don't think that that's what they're going to do. I think maybe there's some capital structure things they can do to attract more direct investment and let the people who want a pure play bet on that future, that, you know, they can invest in GM, like they've done with Cruise. They kind of separated it out a little bit into an LLC. Investors can invest in that part of the business directly. Maybe they do something like that, but I don't think they're going to spin it off.
But one of the interesting things I thought in today's announcement was that by the end of 2025, 40% of the offerings in the showrooms in the United States will be electric vehicles. And what I wonder is, okay, if it's 40% availability, what's the take rate going to be? I mean, we're not seeing, you know, tremendous demand. So this means somebody goes into the dealer and, you know, drives off in a Silverado that doesn't have an electric motor.
Yeah, that was my first question when I saw that number. I mean, that's a real number. You know, you can't accuse them of taking half steps here. But what's the volume on that? And so if you really do have that many models, you know, you're going to have to figure out how you distribute them, how they're spread out across your retail network. You know, you can't have 8% of your volume and 40% of your models. And I don't know what the volume is going to be, but they're going to have to figure that math out. And they've said that they can adjust based on market demand, but we all know in this industry, you've got to set the wheels in motion for a lot of this stuff years and years ahead of time. So it's, you know, it is a true bet on where things are going and the future of the company, I think.
Don't you guys think that these ICE bans are modifying the strategies that these companies had? Because, you know, heretofore we've talked about, oh yeah, the ICE will be around in 2040. But as countries start saying, no more ICE for you, that's got to change your strategy.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we spend so much time on CAFE, right? I mean, think about how much ink gets spilled on what the U.S. is going to do with their CAFE rules. And all it takes is California to come out one day, probably blindside the industry, you know, the biggest market in the U.S., I wouldn't want to be a product planner over at one of those shops, you know?
Well, you know, John and I were communicating earlier today about this whole notion of the United States becoming a technology island in terms of vehicle developments. That, you know, here in the U.S. we're you know, top notch when it comes to pickup truck engineering, but everything else is you know, well, muscle cars too, I suppose. But, you know, in these other areas, not so much. I mean, Mike, to what extent do you think that globalization plays a role in decisions that are being made? I mean, not just by General Motors, but by Ford or FCA and others.
I mean, I think that's all they're really thinking about. I don't think that, I think these guys are way too smart to think that they can plan their business regionally and say, okay, well, you know, we'll set this strategy for the U.S. and this one for Europe and this one. It just, I don't think it works that way. I think that's why Ford came out last year pretty strongly in favor of California's rules. I mean, that was the one thing that Bill Ford said, is that, you know, going to sort of 0% improvement in fuel economy, like the Trump administration at one point was calling for, is not going to help us, because we have to compete everywhere else in the world. And we're not going to engineer stuff region by region. We have to have a global strategy. So yeah, on the one hand, it is a unique market, and they have to do what they're going to do on pickup trucks. But I think broadly, they're looking to be able to get the economies of scale that they need globally. And they need to, you know, I think that's why in the end, battery electric, even more so than hybrids, you know, and we can talk about the whole GM has kind of walked away from hybrids. Ford still sees a place for them. But I think at the end of the day, you know that battery electric is going to cover you on regulatory, you know, rules that you need to hit. And so we're going to go straight there. At least that's what GM's focus is on. I think that's a global view.
Hey, we've got to take another quick commercial break. We're going to come back in just a second here. In fact, we've got a question directed to me from the chat room that we're going to get to, all about electric vehicles. But first, a shout out to our good friends at Borg Warner.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back. And Carmen in the control room sent me this question from Montana Osprey, who says, does John still expect a financial bloodbath in EVs in the short term? And I do. I've been very vocal about this, that between now and 2025, I think it's going to be a financial disaster in the EV segment for automakers. Here's why I said that, and here's why I might put an asterisk to what I said. Tesla is the biggest electric car maker in the world. It has more volume, more expertise than anybody, by far. It doesn't make money selling cars. It does make money when you include the EV credits that it's able to sell. And as I said, I am not criticizing Tesla for selling ZEV credits, other automakers. It's always been part of their business plan. I think it's been a very intelligent approach. But if you take those ZEV credits out, the company doesn't make money. So if the best EV maker in the world cannot make money selling EVs, what chance does anybody else have? Now, here comes the asterisk. Tesla, of course, is going to be growing volume. It's got plants that it's building in Germany and in Texas right now. As its volume comes up, I believe it will become profitable without the ZEV credits. By the way, in another 3 or 4 years, the ZEV credit market is going to be dead as a doornail as the traditional automakers come up with their own ZEV machines. And if GM is right, if GM can cut the cost of its batteries by 60%, which, if you take their publicly announced battery price of $145 on the Bolt EV, and you take 60% out of it, that drops the cost of the batteries below $60 per kilowatt hour. That's a game changer. Now you can price your EV right smack dab on top of an ICE and be able to make a profit on it. So I still think there's going to be a bloodbath in the short term. I'm going to be intrigued to watch, especially Volkswagen brands financials in Europe as they dump all these ID3s and ID4s into the market. I don't believe for a second they're making any money on it. That'll be the first indication. But yeah, I stand by what I said. In the short term, EV market's going to be a financial bloodbath. By the end of this decade, it's going to be where you want to be.
All right, John. So let me ask you about this. So are companies like Lucid and Fisker and Canoo and Nikola, how are they going to fare in this possible bloodbath scenario?
Well, they've got their fingers crossed that they get crazy valuations like Tesla does. And that's how Tesla's been able to survive. Elon Musk has been able to pick up the phone whenever he needs another $2 billion, and he gets it. Their cost of capital has essentially been free. That's why they've been able to stay in business. They've been able to raise money in spite of losing money for a decade. And that's what these other startups are hoping for, that they're going to stay one step ahead of the bill collector until their volume gets to the point, or their other services, their data monetization, their digital services and the like, provide enough revenue that they're profitable.
Mike, will Tesla going to the S&P 500, will that make a difference to the company?
But I mean, it popped the stock nicely this week when that news finally happened. I think that's kind of a one-time, a one-time thing. I think I agree with John. Those credits are going away. That's going to be a headwind for them. I do think that so a report came out this week from Morgan Stanley raising the price target to like $560 or something, which would be like, I don't know, half the GDP or something. I mean, more than $500 billion, which is, I know we all have trouble wrapping our head around that, but their whole premise was that Tesla's software and services is an undervalued, under the radar revenue stream for them. According to this report, they're gonna take in about $1 billion in the next 12 months just on those software and services. And so that's something that the traditional OEMs are just tearing their hair out trying to figure out how, this is yet another aspect where they're chasing Tesla, and they've got ambitions. And we saw GM this week said they're going to do insurance, right, based on data that they get from the car. But we've been hearing the car companies talk about data monetization now for 5+ years, and I don't think there's a whole lot going on there. And meanwhile, Tesla's raking in $1 billion a year. So, there are other avenues for Tesla to make money, and I think that's, whether the valuation's right or not, I think that's what investors are looking at is, they want subscriptions, right? Recurring revenue, the whole Amazon Prime, Netflix concept. They want to apply that to autos, and the closest thing you can do that with is Tesla, and everyone else is trying to figure out the software and services piece just as much as the electrical architecture and the over-the-air updates and all that.
I thought it was interesting. I was thinking about, the OnStar insurance. And I remember that years ago, my dad used to have GMAC car insurance. So, it was like once upon a time they had it, then they got rid of it. Now they're bringing it back. Although this is like a car insurance 2.0 by using the OnStar telematics systems.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, after you, please.
Well, yeah, I think that they have had it almost, I think most of their history. They offered insurance all the way up until when they lost GMAC around the time of bankruptcy. This is a bit of it's kind of a branded as OnStar. I don't think they're doing underwriting policies, at least not right now, but it's a way for them to use the data from the car, drive the driving habits of the driver. And, if they practice safe behavior behind the wheel, they get a discount. They view it as a fair way to set premiums. And I think there's some potential here. The whole trick for the car companies is to take data that the Googles and Apples of the world can't get their hands on, right? The navigation systems of the car, I don't know about you guys, but I use Waze on my phone, and I prop it right up on the dashboard, and that's just that's a better system than any integrated system I've seen. And so you can't just try to match Google and Android and Apple on the apps that you put in the car. You have to use data that only the car is going to know, and insurance starts to get at that. The insurance companies can get some of that from smartphone apps, but some of it they can't. And so I think that's why this is an early area that the car companies are trying to exploit.
Hey, quick aside here. Another comment from the chat room. Marcus Miller says, hey, Tesla did turn a profit in Q3, even without the credits. He's right. I'm talking on an annual basis. Tesla, throughout its history, has had a profitable quarter here or there. I'm talking on an annualized basis. So thanks for making that point, Marcus. You're absolutely right. But that's only on a quarterly basis.
So this week, Carlos Tavares, who is running PSA right now and who will be running Stellantis once the FCA PSA merger occurs, said, and I quote, "Only the most agile with a Darwinian spirit will survive." And he was talking about going forward, given all the expense related to things we've been talking about this entire show, electrification, automation, things like that, he believes is going to cause consolidation in the industry. Who's going to consolidate?
Ooh, good question.
Let John answer that one.
I'll start, but Mike, you and Gary, you guys jump in too. Maybe it's not total consolidation. I'm intrigued by Honda going to General Motors and saying, hey, can you build a couple of EVs for us? And Honda and GM saying, let's get together and do this fuel cell thing. And, Ford taking a position in Rivian, then running to Volkswagen and say, hey, in Europe, why don't we take your MEB platform? I'm not sure we're going to see pure consolidation in the PSA FCA mold. I do believe we're going to see a tremendous amount of cooperation. And as I've said all along, this is the perfect point for ICE cooperation. Mary Barra and Jim Farley should get together and say, why don't we just combine our powertrain operations? Can your customer tell the difference between your 5-liter V8 and our 5-liter V8, your 2-liter 4 and our 2-liter? No, they can't tell the difference. We brand them as if it's something special, but unless you're talking about super high performance engines, the general customer really doesn't care what's under the hood. This is the perfect place for consolidation to take place.
Yeah, John, and to your point on Honda and GM, an announcement just from a couple months ago that I don't think got as much play as it should have was that they're going to cooperate on actual vehicle engineering in North America, internal combustion. So if you look at it, they're across the spectrum of the business: fuel cells, electric vehicles. Honda's a big investor in Cruise, the autonomous division. They're doing vehicle engineering together now, and so I think that's probably the model is without getting into cross capital structure. If you could just pull off these one-off cooperations that get you to market faster, cut your development costs. I mean, they're even doing purchasing with Honda in North America, or they plan to. I think that's the model, rather than getting into these sort of culturally messy tie-ups that the track record is just not there for. But we also don't know. I mean, we might be talking about, who's to say it's OEM to OEM? Maybe it's Waymo buying, Fiat Chrysler, or there could be tech automotive tie-ups that we can't even envision right now too.
Yeah, Gary, what do you think the consolidation is going to be?
Well, okay, I don't know that I know that, but I think that this is something that, one of the topics we talked about was the fact that we have these new entrants coming into the market. Okay, so we have Lucid building that big factory, right? And it's going to have capacity. We see, Tesla's building factories around the world. It will have more capacity. The Rivian plant's going to start up, more capacity. And John, as we've talked about on this show for many, many years, there is overcapacity right now in the auto industry. Now we're adding all of this capacity, and this capacity is being added by brands and companies that we've not heard of before, essentially. So, I mean, I look at it from the point of view of something's got to give. And in terms of, the tie-ups, I mean, you're mentioning the Ford and General Motors getting together and powertrain. Remember the 10-speed transmission that they both developed? I mean, that's an example of going down that road, because, who can tell the difference between, your 10-speed and my 10-speed? No one. But I just wonder whether you're going to need to have some companies literally go away because of the overhead and all that's associated with keeping a company in existence.
Well, I'll say this. I remember in 1980, the then president and chairman of American Motors predicted that by the year 2000, there would be, I think they said, 5 or 6 car companies left in the world. 2 in the US, 2 in Europe, and 1 in Japan. And that was it. And my entire career, there's been people predicting there's going to be consolidation in the future. There's too much capacity. There's too many car companies making too many models with too many brands. And where do we stand in 2020? Way more companies, way more brands, way more overcapacity. It just has not happened. I got to believe it will happen at some point. But right now we're talking decades and decades of this talk of consolidation, and it's never happened.
Doesn't that account for the low valuation of the traditional automakers?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Gary. That's a great point.
Yeah, it could. And now with all these startups, I mean, doesn't this get back to the days? Wasn't there a time, you guys probably know better, early 1900s, where there were a few hundred car companies,
harsh.
Right? I mean, I'm talking about the fragmentation, all the startup. I mean, there was tons of startup car companies, or hundreds of them, and they all got whittled down. But to John's point, we've kind of been static with this number of big automakers, and now we're starting to go back up in terms of number of car companies when you factor in all the startups, the lower barriers to entry to get into the space with electric. So, it's probably tougher now than it was in 1980 to predict how many car companies there's going to be in a few decades.
The other problem, I saw some reporting that the workers, the Kia workers in Korea are talking about striking, and one of the reasons is because 30% less labor is required to make an electric vehicle than an internal combustion engine powered vehicle. So let's say that number is high, but let's say it's 20% less. I mean, again, isn't there going to be tremendous pressures that are going to be put on OEMs in order to deal with this labor situation?
Yeah, in fact, I think this is one of the reasons why you've heard Ford talk about, hey, maybe it's time to start making batteries. They have labor commitments in their contracts with the UAW. And as they shed jobs, they have these commitments that they've got to do something. And we've seen in the past where they've insourced things that they would never do in a normal, non-union environment. Bringing seats back in-house. I mean, that tends to shift in and out depending on how the job count is going. But this is where the non-traditional car companies that don't have these legacy obligations are going to be in a much better, much more competitive situation.
Yeah, I think like something like 40% or more of the Detroit 3 factory footprint is engine plants, powertrain plants, engines and transmissions. You may not need all that space in 10 years, 15 years from now if things go the way that General Motors is talking about them going with electric vehicle adoption. But it's a huge question for these companies.
Really is.
Hell, 10, 15 years. Sounds like next week.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Here's another great comment from Kevin F. in the chat room. He says, we're talking all about these electric vehicles, not much discussion on the maintenance and the servicing of these EVs coming from these startups. He says, where will I service my Rivian truck? Got a hell of a good point.
Although, didn't Rivian talk about that it would set up a network of dealerships across the country? So I think that Rivian is sort of addressing that. And then remember, there's that other issue that's related to electric vehicles, the total cost of ownership. And when Ford was talking about the e-Transit last week, they really emphasized that the electric version of the Transit needs, and I think we use this number a lot in today's show, 40% less maintenance than a gasoline powered truck. So, your Rivian truck isn't going to need to be serviced as often, and I think that Rivian will address that. But that's just my thought.
And it hasn't seemed to bother the Tesla customers to this point yet, or at least
to this point. I think is a critical thing to say there, Mike, because look, the Tesla customer, they drink the Kool-Aid, right? They're willing to forgive this company all kinds of sins because they believe so much in what it's doing.
Yeah.
Once you start to go out into the general public, boy, I'm not sure that you better have a car that is really good. It's got to have Toyota-like kind of quality.
Then it won't break.
Yeah.
So, and then you don't need service. Okay.
That's right.
Somebody will crunch their car. They'll back into a tree. They'll drive into a ditch. Something will break. You're going to have service outlets.
Well, but you remember when we had...
then that's what General Motors and the OEMs, the big OEMs, will say is a big, is a big advantage for them is their dealer network, and to a certain extent, I think that's true.
See, but I was thinking, John. Remember we had Henry Payne on the show, and he had the problem with his Tesla Model 3, and he had to take it to Cleveland to get serviced, and he didn't care.
Yeah, right, and of course. You have to take your Tesla if you live in Michigan to Ohio or Illinois, because we have a very good dealer lobby in the state of Michigan, and they've stiff-armed Tesla as much as they possibly could. But you're right, Henry, it didn't bother him. Didn't bother him in the least, but would it bother me? You bet it would. I don't have the time to drive to Cleveland.
So don't buy a Tesla and don't buy a Rivian, and when one of those General Motors EVs comes out, that'll be the one for you, because I think just like a block away from where you're sitting right now, I think there's a GM dealership, so you'll be all set.
Well, let's see if GM truly does deliver an electric car that is as sensational as what Tesla has. GM still has to prove they're talking the talk, and I do believe they're going to do their best, but let's see if they can actually deliver.
All right, one more topic, then we'll leave.
Okay.
And so this is something that we really haven't talked a lot about. Okay, so that is autonomy. So Uber is trying to shop its autonomous vehicle company, and there's talk that Aurora Innovation, the one that was started by Chris Urmson and Drew Bagnell and I forget, Stuart Anderson, maybe?
Yes, right. Sterling Anderson.
Okay, so the one that those guys started. Now, last year, I mean, Toyota put money into the Uber group. SoftBank put money into the Uber group. I mean, reputable operations said, yeah. And now they're like, we got to sell. Now, is this just a situation of Uber, dealing with financial problems related to the pandemic because people didn't do so much ride sharing? Or is this something more intrinsic about the investment into, level 4, level 5 autonomy?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the Uber situation specifically, but I do know that a lot of people have been calling for this, right? I mean, it's the consolidation, the sort of fragmentation of this thing where you had, dozens and dozens of startups chasing this goal of level 4, level 5. And it's really become these consortiums of, GM Cruise with its Honda backing and, Ford teaming up with Volkswagen, through the startup in Pittsburgh. And so it's
Argo.
Argo. So it's I think it's finally kind of coalesced into these big groups that have the deep pockets to get this stuff done. And that's not to say there's not room for a lot of these startups with specific technologies to sprout up and either, become absorbed or maybe they make a run at it on their own. But I think it's just the natural consolidation of that business that has turned out to be much tougher, as we all know, than people thought it might be a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think the Uber example is special to Uber. They launched the ride sharing service, then autonomous technology sort of bubbled up. They got very excited about that, realized they were way behind Waymo, stole one of their guys, Anthony Lewandowski. He stole a bunch of information that he brought along with him. They started a crash program. They cut corners. They ended up killing a pedestrian in Phoenix. And I think when you add all that up, plus the pandemic, plus the fact they never have made any money, in fact, they bleed money, but they're able to raise more capital, that they finally said, make versus buy decision time. Do we really have to make all this autonomous technology? I mean, is that really the business that we're in? Or are we a mobility company? We don't buy the cars that our drivers have. It's their cars. So my guess is that Uber said, okay, strategic decision time. We can just buy this autonomous technology at some point. We can buy the vehicles that we want to put in our fleet. We don't have to be the makers of them. And that's why I think it decided time to get out of this business. And I think it could possibly find a willing buyer for one reason only, and that's the software engineers that they have. Now, maybe you buy Uber's AV operations because you get all those people to come with you, rather than just wait until the whole thing collapses on its own and then you try to go and hire them. But then it's a feeding frenzy. You're competing against a bunch of other companies that are trying to hire all these software engineers. So they probably have a decent chance of selling it.
See, I just go ahead, Mike.
And they do have the network, right? And that's to the extent that level 4 actually becomes a real thing, and we're going to all be schlepped around in robot taxis. They play a very valuable role in having the customers with the smartphones in their pockets with the app already on their phone. I mean, that's not that's not a small thing. I think Cruise thinks that they can replicate that. I think it'd be really hard to do. And so they may not have to buy anything as much as join forces with, you know, a Waymo or a Cruise or an Argo at some point down the road. You know, I think to the extent that actually comes to fruition, they still play a valuable role in a robot taxi world.
Yeah, see, I just look at it from the point of view of, okay, we can see the possibility of making money from an EV, right? In terms of you're producing this in volume and you're selling it just as you're selling a normally powered vehicle. But to get to a level 4, level 5 vehicle, I mean, it's going to take an extreme amount of money. Who's going to be paying for all of that? And when you get a return on your investment? I mean, you know, you can only deliver so many Domino's pizzas in your, you know, autonomous Ford Fusion with the oven in the back. I mean, it's just like, so you're going to have a lot of companies that are going to just be burning money left, right, and center. And I think that's going to be the huge challenge because, you know, where's the payback?
Yeah.
And on that bright note,
Yeah. Let's go think about that, Gary, because there's a lot of money in it if we figure it out.
yeah.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great to have you on board.
Yeah, you bet. Enjoyed it, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mike.
We'll see you later. And Gary, we'll be back at it again next week.
No, it's Thanksgiving next week.
Oh, Thanksgiving. That's right. The week after.
Exactly.
Thank you for that correction. And have a
Enjoy
great
your-
Thanksgiving, you guys.
Enjoy your turkey.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Thank you.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Hyundai, Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.